What's up, guys? Hope you have a fantastic week so far. Once again, we're answering war review. Look at Fiveish lore, number 29. Its name is Goge Vandire. I think that's how you say it. I don't know for sure, but it's one thing I've learned by doing all these Fiveish lores and other lore that I've watched in the last couple of years is that majority of these people are assholes and psychotic, and I don't feel like this guy's gonna be any different. Now, how psychotic he's gonna be is to be determined, but it's by Old Man, and he does a phenomenal job with all his videos. His personality is phenomenal, so I know it's going to be an absolute banger of a video, so I'm super hyped. But like always, please check him out in the description. So some love. If you guys enjoy my content, if you guys enjoy my reactions, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get to it.
A warning. The views expressed in Fiveish lore, the lore delivered in rants, are sanctioned by their scholar Progenium as excess rageous. Prolonged exposure can result in loss of IQ, high blood pressure, random outbursts, and blunt force trauma to the skull, resulting in unconsciousness. Please consult your local physician for more information.
Master of the Ministorum, Goge Vandire. Combine the depravity of Hitler, the ego of John the XII, and the charisma of Rasputin, and you may get a quarter of what Vandire embodies.
This looks nasty, man.
He was single-handedly, posthumously responsible for the creation of the Ordo Hereticus. Because it took a real asshole to demonstrate the value of checks and balances.
In 40k lore, certain heretics are considered extremely heinous. On board the Dauntless-class vessel Emperor's Truth, the commissar who investigates these vicious traitors has developed a special framework. This is the pilot.
Who's gonna play that music
the Imperial cult has gone through a few major reformations, but none so drastic as the one that brought about the rise and fall of Goge Vandire. And to understand this colossal example of why you shouldn't cheer on little Timmy when he tortures grasshoppers, we actually have to go back to the events of the Horus Heresy. The Imperium's fascination with and eventual worship of the Emperor goes all the way back to a woman with a camera. Eucrate Kila, one of the first saints of the Imperial Creed, not only was one of the first, if not the first, to actively...
Dude, it's weird seeing something from the Warhammer universe that depicts a normal-looking person. I was not expecting this.
...perform miracles in the Emperor's name. She was also de facto figurehead of a group of people during the Siege of Terra who absolutely fetishized the human skull so much that even Slanesh began to think it wasn't hot.
I didn't say she thought normal. She looks normal. Jeez Louise.
This group would eventually be known as the Temple of the Savior Emperor, and the skull became its icon, with most of its members running in to fight Coronite berserkers with sackcloths on because, you know, that's totally reasonable. After the Emperor Control-Alt-Deleted Horus and was put on the Golden Throne, the message of hope, love, and brotherhood in the light of the Emperor had a massively better appeal than, "we're all screwed," which was the other prevailing thought process. As time began to pass, of course there were other faiths that worshipped the Emperor, but the Temple of the Savior Emperor made sure they saw the error of their ways and kindly absorbed them into their ranks, if they repented of their falsehoods. Unless you lack the awareness of Helen Keller in a sensory deprivation tank, you know exactly what this means. Of course, they completely denied that any of the well-supplied and frenzied mobs that were at the doorsteps of the other faiths in question were sent by them, but if you believe that, there's an email from a Nigerian prince waiting in your inbox.
Brilliant.
By the early 32nd millennium, the temple's reach had grown to the point that nearly a full 2/3 of the Imperium were skull-fetishizing members of its order. In fact, on Terra, the only ones who didn't get behind the order were the Space Marines and the Cult Mechanicus, the latter for obvious reasons. The former because a lot of them were trained by Space Marines who actually saw the Emperor at some point. In short, the reach of the temple was everywhere, and even Ray Charles could see where this was going. The Temple of the Savior Emperor was made into a state religion and reclassified as the Adeptus Ministorum. It only took a few centuries before the leader of the Ministorum, called the Ecclesiarch, was given a permanent seat on the ruling council of the Imperium, the High Lords of Terra. Now let's talk about why that's bag-on-head stupid. Up until this point, the Temple of the Savior Emperor had been a student driver, forced to keep their hands at 2 and 10, backing off before they went over the speed limit, and generally doing everything they could not to screw up so badly they get their worship daddy privileges taken away. But the absolute second that the cult became a state religion, that same student driver spun the tires and started blaring the Yang Yang Twins while drinking a fifth of vodka and talking about their dead homie Tupac, then promptly started going 80 through a school zone and leading anyone who tried to turn on the warning lights into a high-speed chase through opposing traffic. In short, now that the cult scriptures had become the literal Imperial gospel with the backing of the Adeptus Terra, the Ministorum blitzkrieged from Oh Holy Night to Oh Holy Shit! The Imperium was split into regions called dioceses, with cardinals in charge of priests and missionaries inside their zones of control. Then the church started letting everyone know that the emperor needed gas money and rent money, and well, you know, even though the imperial citizens were already being tied by the Imperium itself, you know what, why not a bit of bling for the Golden Throne as well, am I right, you guys? There's an issue, though. You see, the Temple of the Savior Emperor had a massive self-esteem issue, as I've already stated. So basically, another pretty sect was getting attention, and it decided to destroy this rival entirely. This sect was called the Confederation of Light, and they preached poverty and humility. And if you're not blind, deaf, and dumb, it kind of flies in the face of the Emperor needs a brand new bag, bitches! So basically, the deathmatch between Lindsay Lohan and Mean Girls and that cute girl who feeds the homeless at the local soup kitchen began, in which the logical conclusion of the utter beatdown of the Confederation of Light happened with monstrous forces of the Imperial Navy and Imperial Guard, as well as a few 100,000 of Jim's good old boys who just wanted to show up and break furniture. You know, serving the Emperor in righteous conflict and all that. After the guys who were saying the Emperor loves you if you give me fat stacks ran roughshod over the cute girl at the soup kitchen and ran her off, it left the Ministorum completely unchallenged. Now, a few shrines still existed, but for the most part, the Confederation of Light was obliterated. By the time the 33rd millennium rolled around, every single cardinal and every single diocese could go to every single planet of the Imperium and roll into a ridiculously garish temple that would be decked out from floor to ceiling in billions upon billions of Imperial thrones worth of luxury, while conveniently ignoring the starving people outside. Because we don't associate with poor people, and the poor people should have given more to the Emperor if they wanted to get richer. Am I right, you guys? In fact, if they weren't using the money to get themselves gold-gilded toilet seats with mother-of-pearl inlay, they were using the money to purify the unclean, aka declaring war against anyone who said the Emperor's favorite color was blue instead of gold. Let's just be clear. These were not crusades, because crusades had to come from on high from the High Lords. And frankly, even though the Ministorum had a monstrous amount of power, not even they at that point were willing to try and get the Adeptus Terra to start committing holy purges of the unclean that would bathe the entirety of the Imperium in blood. That actually comes later. Going back to the student driver example I used before, the Ministorum as an organization began to binge drink while snorting impressive amounts of cocaine while hiring...
So it's like, after you look past, like, how cool the Imperium is, like their cool gear and technological advances, they're a bunch of just assholes. And that's put it very lightly. Like, you could go on a 40-minute rant about how terrible the Imperium is, but we're not going to do that.
Hookers that would hang out of the passenger window the entire time they were weaving their way through traffic. In other words, they began to directly influence Imperial law. Pop the cherry on top of this bullshit Sunday, and the ecclesiarch began to claim that this would not only be approved by the Emperor, but they could hear the Emperor speaking to them. And the Emperor wanted one thing above any other thing.
So I want everyone to feel the love of God by coming up here and putting $1 in the box.
The ecclesiarchy also began dictating what threats the Imperium should address, and in what order, and immediately started putting their 2 cents in on the organization of armies. As you can imagine, this went over swimmingly with the High Lords, especially with the Cult Mechanicus, which was getting overly suspicious, and the Administratum, which saw the overreach for what it was. Even the Space Marines out by Bob's World were starting to look at their astropaths when they'd receive updates like they were being pranked, and when the Space Marines think you're drinking a little bit too much Kool-Aid, well, there's a problem now, isn't there? But you see, the Administratum had enjoyed its position of absolute power for an extremely long time for an extremely good reason. And while Lohan from Mean Girls was all good in trying to bully and knock around the cute girl at the soup kitchen, the absolute second she started stepping over that line, the Administratum promptly decided that someone was about to get properly rehabilitated. To be a little bit more direct about it, in the mid to
girl?
late 34th millennium, the Ministorum began to slap
There it
around
is,
the
man, that's
Ministorum in
bad.
any way it possibly could.
Ugh.
They began to position loyal followers inside the Ministorum's rank, undermine the Ecclesiarch at every opportunity in a meeting of the High Lords, and redirected resources away from the Ministorum any chance they got. Lindsay Lohan had finished making Mean Girls and was now well on her way to dealing with major issues like being undermined at every twist and turn.
Jeez.
This wasn't an overnight ordeal. In fact, the Ministorum took nearly 2 millennia to break the power of the Ministorum.
Damn.
Eventually, the Ministorum just gave up trying and started playing Flappy Bird, while the Administratum was all but running the Ministorum from its own seat of power and influence called the Holy Synod. The only people who actually knew how down bad the Ministorum was were those in the position of highest power. So now the Ministorum suddenly realized they had been completely marginalized in their own organization and elected a new ecclesiarch to get them out of rehab and back into the world. They elected Benedict IV, who had been the cardinal from the Segmentum Tempestus, who promptly got into power, put on his pope hat, and told everyone to pack their stuff because the Ministorum was moving. Now, by this point, I think I've covered the fact the Ministorum has a spending habit that would make the Kardashians flinch. But what the Ministorum did then was simply mind-numbing. They upended their entire operation from the floors to the ceiling and moved it from Terra to Ophelia 7 in the Ecclesiarch Benedict's home diocese. And when I say they moved the entire operation, I mean they moved everything. And if you thought moving across town was an expensive proposition, try moving across the galaxy. Did they decide they should move into a starter home and rebuild their power from there? Nah, they decided they'd buy an area the size of Alaska, Texas, and California put together. Then they bulldozed everything on it on one of the most populated planets in the Imperium. And then they built a palace that was only rivaled by the Imperial Palace. How'd they do this? They simply looked to the unwashed masses who lived on worlds that owed ties to them and tied them even harder.
That's awful.
And kids, the word of the day is trend, because this becomes one. In fact, this became a trend Imperium-wide. The Ministorum quickly regained the influence it had lost to the Administratum by virtue of sheer distance from the Administratum itself, and promptly began flexing as hard as they could like a TikTok challenge video. They did completely away with the pretense of trying to influence the raising of armies and outright starting assembling armies of their own, with a fleet to match. So, the group that became known as the Fraterus Templars had been around for, well, I don't know, since the early days of the Imperium. But now, they were getting decked out just like the Imperial Guard. So, in the span of 1,000 years, the Ministorum had moved everything, rebuilt everything, refurbished everything, and were funding an army and a navy, all the while having a lovely competition where the cardinals of the various dioceses were building larger and larger cathedrals and palaces. And all of it was being funded by the poor bastards who lived on their worlds. All the while, they began to slam dance their way through any opposition to their iron-fisted approach to dealing with anyone who disagreed with them on the Emperor's favorite color. Those who lived underneath the cardinals were tied harder and harder, and the population began to seethe and then began to outright rebel. And just like any other good religious organization which suddenly finds itself with a population questioning its motives, they doubled down so brutally hard it was stunning. The Adeptus Assassinorum was unleashed, killing planetary governors and reappropriating their wealth, in the Emperor's name, of course, and then they murdered anyone who objected to that, in the Emperor's name, of course, and then they raised the ties to the planets, yet again, in the Emperor's name, of course, so they could have a statue built in their honor and put in their mile-wide garden they would stroll in, wearing robes that cost more than more planetary populations could afford with a year's wages put together. Anyone who objected to this found out about the Fraterus Templar and how well equipped they were and how managed they were, because they were getting deployed and were smacking down entire population centers that objected to the higher ties and the excessive spending. And I just want everyone to remember we're not at the bottom yet, friendos. We've only just begun.
No
You see, the
shit.
Imperium was having some real problems. Xeno incursions, rebellions, a series of weak leaders in the Adeptus Terra, and a series of warp storms was beginning to bleed the Imperium. But the Ministorum and the Ecclesiarchy were still in the middle of their hate monger of each other, too hard to seemingly care what was happening in the wider Imperium. Just like that, orc warbands are everywhere, Katie is fighting off constant chaos incursions, and even rival cults popped up in the worship of the Emperor. This is just a drop in the bucket, and it's all because the Administratum and Ministorum couldn't stop their slap fight.
And the grunts are the ones that
It was in
always
the middle
suffer
of
the
this
worst.
intergalactic argument that the Ministorum decided they were moving back to Terra. Only 300 years after they had left the capital of humanity in the first place, they took literally everything with them, and now they were going back. Who paid for this? Oh, you know, just the people who are currently having their teeth kicked in by the Fraterus Templar, of course. No problem with that whatsoever. I'm sure they're gonna be... They rebelled again. Once again, the Fraterus Templar were sent to layeth the smacketh down, and they did so with gusto. Now, we're near the end of the 35th millennium, and everyone who worshipped the Emperor, which was really everyone, started noticing the signs that Daddy was indeed quite pissed off. Entire population centers devolved into killing and self-flagellation to try to stem off the anger of Daddy. In fact, entire families were being murdered for stepping outside the line. Population centers were either being murdered or enslaved, and other less savory options, because someone suspected they thought the Emperor's favorite color was blue again. I used the color thing, and it's not a gag, it's not a joke. Any petty difference during this time that separated a person from the locked-in gospel of the Ministorum would have them marked, rounded up, and soundly informed of Daddy's issues with them continuing to live. And it's during this backwash of complete excess and absolute insanity, with the entire galaxy preparing to roll up and die, and every facet of Imperial society on the verge of rebelling or already rebelling, we get to the subject of today's Voxcast, Goge Vandire.
That was just a lead up to this
What
guy.
are you... Whoa.
The fuck?
I'll take it from here. No need for notes. See yourself out.
Shotgun was not necessary.
Okay.
The pus-stained pestilence, which bears the name of Goge Vandire, was a walking abomination. Prior to him becoming the 361st High Lord of the Administratum, he did everything possible to make sure the least powerful ecclesiarch in history was put in charge of the Ministorum. And as was typical with him before he became the High Lord, the method he used ranged from blackmail to just flat out murdering people who threatened his bloated rise to power.
So shocked.
The second he had murdered and manipulated his way into the High Lord's chair, he walked right into the ecclesiarchal palace with a group of Imperial guard and shot the new ecclesiarch before declaring himself the new head of the church. Now I can guess it seems strange that no one recognized that Lord Farquaad was in the middle of setting himself up as the most powerful man since the Emperor himself. Just remember, the entire galaxy was coming apart, but everyone was still embroiled in a stupid slap fight over who was in charge. It only made sense Sergeant Shameless would be able to get himself elected if he used the right amount of threats and knife work on the right people. So no shit, there we were. An Imperium on the verge of crashing and burning with a man in charge who had the moral center that ranged between coked up hooker and Florida man on bath salts. Jean-Claude Vandire began promptly murdering anyone who questioned him, and even those he assumed might. He promptly had nearly the entire leadership structure of the Ministorum executed, and the Ministorum cardinals who tried to run got swallowed by a warp storm. Looky there! The Dark Lord of the Sick had executed Order 66 and was now in charge of the entirety of the Ministratum and the Ministorum.
Nice.
And what's more, he claimed the warp storm that had devoured the Cardinals had been sent by no one else but the Emperor. Yeah, right! It was sent by someone, but if you actually believe it was the Emperor, I have cheap land in the Petitioner City to sell you.
Yeah, but people are gullible, man.
History
Gullible
is an
and fearful.
absolute dumpster fire, and everybody knows it. But it takes a special kind of unrestricted waste of precious amino acids to have a time period named the Reign of Blood coincide with their rule. Unluckily for us, this walking mistake was very keen on making sure that every word he ever said was recorded for history's sake. He was followed by a literal tide of scribes that had to make sure they wrote down everything that came out of his mouth, and anyone else's for that matter. Goge Vandire was more paranoid than Epstein in prison, and he saw plots against him literally everywhere. It wasn't long before a blind pigeon could tell that the Imperium was in a worse spot now than it had been in nearly 5,000 years. Private Perv decided that mass surveillance was the way to go and started gathering evidence that half the time didn't even exist. Even better, he thought the best way to go about life was the baseless accusation of people to get them dragged off to his torture dungeon he had built in the ecclesiarchal palace right where the bones of the saints were, which I'm guessing had some immediate effects. Oh yeah, and he started doing this thing where he'd stop walking and then fall over and he'd flop like a turd on the ground before getting up, claiming he had talked to the Emperor, but apparently whoever was actually talking to him would give him great suggestions like, oh, I don't know, let me list a few. He ordered the virus bombing of Kalena 7 for absolutely no reason. Not many people died, only a double-digit number with the word billion behind it. Oh, here's a good one. He sent the Imperial Guard to attack an Agra world and enslaved every female under the age of 12. Imagine being a loyal guardsman and being forced to do that. Ooh, how about the time he woke up from talking to whatever was in his head and decided to melt the ice caps on a planet called Johanna and drown 4 billion people? Why'd he do that?
What would you do for a Klondike bar?
Just remember, he
guy's
did what he did in those
terrible.
examples for no reason at all. Zero. What he did to his imaginary enemies was worse, and his actual enemies? Well, let's just put it like this. You'd happily opt for cock and ball torture. Captain Corruption made sure every order was recorded by the scribes, and he ordered the deaths of billions and ordered reforms for the Guard and Navy. Because of Vandire, it became perfectly acceptable in the Imperial Navy to literally shank your way to the top, using murder as a promotional tool. All the while, he would make these grand speeches about the state of the Imperium and demanding justice for all the wrongs committed. At this point, the Imperium was well and truly doing its best impression of a piece of driftwood, because to be anything else in this particular river of insanity invited the extermination of your planet. Go with the flow, baby. All the while, the Imperium became more and more of a modern art masterpiece. Then one day, a spy told Vandire about a sect of Emperor worshippers that didn't toe the line on a planet called San Leor. Everyone expected the typical response, which at this point was the extermination of the planet, but instead, Vandire decided to go to the planet and have a look for himself. Mainly, it was due to the people telling him what was going on there. This sect of Emperor worshippers just happened to be what would become my order, the Adeptus Sororitas. Back then, we were known as the Daughters of the Emperor, and the Daughters were an all-female group who sought to worship the Emperor through inner purity.
What she means is burning people alive, hitting them with blunt objects, and stabbing them repeatedly to purge the unclean.
Commissar?
Sister Evelay?
I'm in the middle of talking about Vandire!
Oh, I know you're in the middle of talking about that walking sewage dump. I've tapped into the comm feed to make sure you tell the full story.
I am telling the full story!
Well, keep going.
Anyway, the Daughters use brutal learning programs as well as studying ancient arts of war to cleanse themselves. Vandire immediately ordered a ship to take him to San Leor and announced he was visiting the planet as the Ecclesiarch.
You can imagine how the population began to void its collective bowels.
Yeah, no doubt. Van Dumbass has wiped out entire planets for less than what the Daughters were doing. He had agents assemble the entire population on the road to the temple where the Daughters were, and every single one of them had to show Vandire what he considered was his due respect. Personally, I think he deserved a foot up his ass.
Focus.
Right.
It's fair.
He even had newborn babies and the elderly forced to bow, and if they didn't, they were executed. Basically, it was a North Korean celebration at gunpoint.
Sounds
I mean
worse,
that both
which is
literally
shocking.
and figuratively. Van Nugget had this broadcast to the entire Imperium. When he reached the temple, he told a young daughter of the Emperor that he was there, and she basically told him that she couldn't care less and that no one in the Order recognized him as having the authority to tell them anything.
Naturally, this is why everyone who was surrounding this was happy they were wearing brown pants, because Vandire typically would check the box for genocide at that point.
Yeah, at this point
he
in
hasn't,
Imperial
though.
history, when a daughter of the Emperor told Vandirea that everyone flat out expected the planet to go from peaceful existence to violent death in the next 20 to 30 minutes, depending on if Goge decided to take a piss first. Instead, he did something out of character. He reacted calmly and rationally and asked to speak to their leader.
Imagine that. A guy comes up to the Imperial Academy of Karens and
But like, why?
Commissar!
Like,
Well,
he
I'm
has to have
just
some
saying,
motive,
birds
like
of a
some
feather and all
alternative
that.
motive
I
for
know where
doing
you
that. So
sleep, old man.
it's something
no
against his
shit,
heart.
continue.
It can't be against his heart
I'm gonna hit him with something
because
heavy.
there's no heart there to give.
A few minutes later, Van Drano was standing in front of most of the daughters of the Emperor and prayed for protection in front of a shrine with his Rosarius. He then stood up, turned to one of his guards, and told that guard to shoot him.
Brown pants, again.
After a bit of haggling and one of the most unsubtle threats imaginable to someone who knew that Van Doughboy could and would do, the guard pulled his pistol and shot him. There was a flash of light, and when everyone could see again, Goge was standing in the middle of the chamber without a scratch. Everyone there instantly started bowing and scraping.
Yeah...
You see, no one in that chamber knew what a Rosarius was, and how it holds the conversion field generator.
Essentially, Vandire had a force field that no one really knew about.
Oh
Now,
my
what would have
gosh.
been funny is if someone had decided they wanted further proof and unloaded a bolter magazine into him.
Well, it worked. The daughters of the Emperor were convinced. He rounded them up after taking oaths of fealty from them and took them back to Terra. He began recruiting a lot more of them, too, and putting them through even more insane amounts of training. He then decided they needed a name change, and started calling them the Brides of the Emperor.
I've watched enough Tal propaganda to see where this is going.
And you'll answer
I don't
for
like that
that
either.
later.
It's for
I like that.
educational purposes. Move on.
I am, damn it! They became his bodyguards and closest companions. Goge Van Dumbass had the brides trained extensively by the best tutors he could get his hands on, and got them decked out in the absolute best arms and armor he could get his hands on. And considering he was the most powerful man in the Imperium, he could get his hands on quite a lot.
Speaking of which,
Not another word.
I'm just saying.
Commissar?
Fine. Shutting up. I'm not saying anything. Keep going. I promise I won't say anything.
Good.
I promise I won't talk about what a guy surrounded by a bunch of young, physically fit, toned, and eager to please women would do when they would do literally anything to make him
no.
happy.
Thank you.
I mean, we are just talking about Vandire here, not how he turned the organization that would become the Sisters into his own private harem of massively devoted waifus.
Right.
Lots
That's
of sex.
disgusting. That's
Something
disgusting.
you're not going to be getting much of if you keep this up.
What? I
That's
said I
fucked
wasn't
up,
going to
man.
talk about it.
In any case, the brides were a solid investment, and they took protecting Van Dildo to a whole new level no one had ever seen before. They were his nurses and food tasters. They'd sing for him and entertain him and read
Ride
poetry
him like
to
a Clydesdale.
Commissar! And they kill for him. A lot. In fact, a few members of the Holy Synod tried to have him killed, but the brides went into the chamber and locked the door. They killed every cardinal there and came out carrying their heads, just to be sure. The church carried out pogrom after pogrom, and even though Van Doofy kept building the cathedrals and spires on other planets, the Imperial Palace on Terra started to turn into a ruin. Property value plummeted because the dust was almost knee-high in places, and that's not a joke.
Damn.
In fact, the entire place turned into a near wreck, with grime covering almost every surface so much even the windows were coated. Vandire wanted it this way, because the longer he lived, the more he seemed to get scared of clean places and light in general.
Basically, to anybody who actually knew better and wasn't drinking the Kool-Aid, Goge Vandire was not talking to and had never been talking to the Emperor at all.
The brides
Shocked.
kept Vandire pumped up on drugs to keep him alive, but not even that could keep away his nightmare. If you wanted to make him piss himself, the best way to do it was apparently a glow stick, because he was so scared of light at that point, it bordered on absolute paranoia. Entire segments of the Imperial Palace were lit only by a single candle.
You should probably introduce Sebastian Thor at this point.
Was
Jeez,
getting to
dude.
that.
It's just getting weirder
One day,
and weirder,
while
man.
Vandire was doing his best impersonation of a goldfish on land, a messenger came to the palace to report about the planet Dimimar. Van Dribble's screams of abject nerd rage echoed in the halls. Remember the Confederation of Light? Well, a figurehead came to the organization by the name of Sebastian Thor. In fact, the rites and rituals of the Confederation of Light were being reinstated through the entire diocese, spearheaded by Dimimar, a planet that promptly declared Van Depression a traitor. Within 3 months, over 80 systems had declared loyalty to the Confederation of Light, and only thing stopping them was a bunch of guns and ships that everyone knew wouldn't hesitate to shoot.
Vandire's response was, typical.
Van Dipshit ordered a massive fleet of Fataris Templar to go and deal with the planet. And by deal with it, I mean kill everything on it, repopulate it, and then kill it again. Just as the fleet made it through its first jumps, it landed in the Clack system.
At that point, as if he didn't know it already, Vandire discovered that he had well and truly pissed off the Emperor. A huge warp storm surged up and promptly removed a solid chunk of the Fataris Templar off the active duty roster and slotted them into the column titled Demon Food.
This warp storm was called the Storm of the Emperor's Wrath.
Makes you feel a little bit tingly, doesn't it?
Justice.
Yep.
But not enough justice.
Cardinal
He
Palace
needs
is in
to...
the entirety of the Segmentum Obscurus were the
Needs to
first to
go.
realize that the entire Segmentum was rebelling when mobs of converts tore through. Sebastian Thor's name kept being brought up, and legitimately everyone was trying to figure out who he was. The High Lords dispatched teams to gather intelligence, and when they got the reports back, they were stunned, floored, shell-shocked, taken aback, startled, amazed, in awe, impressed to silence,
Okay.
thunderstruck,
That's enough.
confounded,
Okay.
shooken up,
Okay.
overwhelmed,
Okay.
rendered speechless.
He wasn't a shithead in any way.
And in this universe, that's a miracle of the Emperor. Thor was born in a habitat in the Scala Progenium and was an introvert, bothering no one when suddenly it appeared he was having dreams of the Emperor. He publicly denounced the ecclesiarchy and began preaching,
Just like
bringing
that.
thousands, then millions, then after a conversation with the planetary governor, billions. Vandire couldn't even place spies in the group because they'd be found out almost instantly. No one could figure out how he was doing it. Even the warp itself was parting for him as he started heading to Terra. Thor
my.
was being hailed as a godlike being, and
Emperor?
diocese after diocese
His little
swore
finger there a
loyalty
little
to
bit.
the new sect of religion that Thor was bringing with him.
This was a major shift. Entire planets had had enough of the mean girl style of religion and wanted the girl in the soup kitchen with a heart of gold.
What are you talking about?
Never mind, don't worry about it.
Okay then, let's talk about what happened next. Now, largely the Space Marines stay out of everything. They're kind of like that. They just try their best to stay out of politics and above
Just
it
chill.
all. It's rare if a Space Marine can
Just, couple £1,000, super soldier, demigods. They're just chilling, just playing some ping pong, just pop some beers.
even be caught caring about politics in the slightest. The
Pretty funny,
Mechanicus
that'd be pretty
themselves,
funny.
they have their own way of doing things. And they could also not care that much about what happens on worlds that aren't theirs. Even still, Space Marine chapters looked at what was happening. Here's a recording from one conversation that got overheard.
I love killing orcs.
Oh, nothing beats killing Eldar.
That Sebastian Thor fellow seems like a pretty swell guy.
Think he eats pineapple on his pizza?
Even the Mechanicus was messaging the High Lords.
Explain this bullshit!
Now let's do a quick recap. Van Dramamine had successfully
Oh,
created a
gosh.
rebellion, brought the Imperial Palace
It's
to
amazing.
ruin, killed more loyal Imperials than Abaddon has in 10,000 years, and nearly brought the Imperium itself to its knees. Due to him, an entire quarter of the galaxy was in revolt, and taking advantage of this bunch of Xeno species had kicked off invasions in all corners of the galaxy. What could he possibly do to make this worse? Well, I'll tell you.
He'll find a way.
He declared the Black Templars and a few other chapters of Space Marines heretics and traitors, dissolved the High Lords, and ordered every army and fleet he had left to attack both the Space Marines and the Mechanicus. At this point, Van dumped
Dude, bro is off his rockers. Like he's been off his rockers, but now he's free falling. What? What?
Dumpster fire had well and truly pissed off the entire fucking galaxy. The Black Templars, Firehawks, Soul Drinkers, and the Guardians of the Imperial Palace itself, the Imperial Fists, all joined with a massive army of March and Tech Guards to go to the Imperial Palace, find Vandire, and explain the error of his judgment to him with a power fist to the face. The only problem was the 10,000 brides of the Emperor standing in their way.
Kill them all.
This should really tell you something about how potent the Brides of the Emperor were. They were holding off the combined strength of 4 Space Marine chapters and an entire army of Mechanicus, and they were doing it impressively well. All that yoga must have done something.
Now, while the Space Marines typically couldn't care less about politics, and the Mechanicus in most cases only gets involved when technology is up for grabs, the Custodian Guard flat out refuses to care. They are the personal guard of the Emperor. That's all they do.
Yeah,
and that's all they want to do. They would be perfectly content standing in the same spot for 50 years without even flinching. In fact, they only started giving a crap when they noticed the walls of the palace were shaking, mainly due to the massive force sieging it. This raises red flags. And the biggest red flag was raised when they noticed one of the groups sieging it were the Imperial Fists themselves, whose entire job was to guard the Imperial Palace. They decided now was a great time to start asking a few questions.
The Custodians knew the palace better than literally anyone else, and it kind of surprised everyone when they just kind of showed up in the command centers of the attacking chapters, and the Mechanicus asking why the hell they were shooting at the Imperial Palace. They got filled in real quick, though.
Oh, shit.
The Custodians can sometimes, well, they can be dumb as rocks.
See the first heretic or mistakes of the Emperor 3 for more on that little subject.
This wasn't one of those times, though. They infiltrated all the way to the doorway of Van Disgusting's audience chamber, and there they met Alicia Dominica, leader of the Brides of the Emperor. Custodians decided not to murder them all, which if you know anything about the Custodians, they could easily do, and they tried talking. The brides on their end usually had chosen violence every time someone said anything negative about Vandire.
Don't do
but
it.
they were looking at actual custodians.
Yeah, you just you zip it, you shut up, and you sit down and just play nice. Just don't try. Just don't try. You pissed off the wrong people, man.
So everyone is perfectly aware a custodian is such a mythological figure at that point in history that the brides would have been less surprised to see an actual Primarch coming towards them. The custodians were the living embodiment of the Emperor's will made manifest. They wouldn't just start shooting at that, and good luck trying to convince them that they, the custodians, had turned on the Emperor.
At the end of the day, the brides refused to stop defending Vandire, so the leader of the Custodians decided on a different approach. In over 10,000 years, there had been less than 10 people allowed in the inner sanctum of the Imperial Palace that weren't there to be turned into battery packs or didn't already work there to begin with. You don't just get to go into the throne room. Out of the less than 10 who have been allowed in, 1 was a Primarch and 6 were brides of the Emperor. And they were taken in by the Centurion of the Custodes himself. Oh, to be there with the God Emperor of mankind.
Sister Evelay.
So magnificent.
Sister Evelay.
What? Oh, sorry. I got distracted.
Continue.
Well, no one knows what happened, but when they came out, they wanted to go see
see the manager.
Shut up! But basically, yes. They were furious. They renounced Vandire then and there and gathered the 4,000 brides who still lived, who unanimously...
There's only 4,000 left, dude. They got destroyed. And I know they fought well, but... Ooh.
agreed that they were daughters of the Emperor again. The guns attacking the palace went silent as the daughters all went to see Van Dickhead. He didn't even notice the entire audience chamber was packed out with his former bodyguard. That's when Alicia Dominica stepped forward. Her next words were, "Awesome, inspiring, and they've been so important to me that I want to have them tattooed on my skin for all time."
And here they are read completely out of context and character.
Commissar!
You have committed the ultimate heresy. Not only have you turned your back on the Emperor and stepped away from his light, You have profaned his name and almost destroyed everything he has striven to build. You have perverted and twisted the path he has laid for mankind to tread. As your own decrees have stated, there can be no mercy for such a criminal, no pity for such a criminal. I renounce your lordship. You walk in the darkness and cannot be allowed to live. Your sentence has been long overdue, and now it is time for you to die.
Just say that. How dare you? All I wanted to do was say that.
And here's what Vandire said in
my
return.
favorite. That's not fair.
Oh my
Time
gosh.
to die I do not have. Too busy I am.
Whoa, it was just a joke. It was just a joke.
The chainsword.
And then Alicia Dominica cut off Vandire's head. Sebastian Thor was called to Terra,
He was
and
too
he
quick.
refused twice before the remaining High Lords, in absolute shock, declared him a traitor and demanded he stand trial. At that point, he came to Terra without violence. For 2 months, the trial of Sebastian Thor went on, and it was mainly due to some bitter High Lords who weren't used to being told no. The shocking thing was that up there with the High Lords was the Captain General of the Custodians, who upon declaring him not guilty of charges, told Thor he was going to be the new Ecclesiarch. When Thor told the Custodian no, the Captain General took him aside and spoke very quietly.
Threatened.
Spoke very quietly to him, and he agreed, becoming the 292nd Ecclesiarch. He immediately began reforming the church. He made Ophelia 7 a dual capital and set policies that would ensure no one would have total power over the Ministorum again. He broke down the diocese into smaller areas so less people could be controlled by less psychopaths, and he agreed to decree passage.
Essentially, the decree was meant to make sure the church couldn't raise an army again. It banned the church from having any men under arms.
The newly renamed Daughters of the Emperor came up. Typically, doing what the Daughters had done would get you and the planet you were raised on both deep-fried and virus bombed. But the Custodians has said that they found no fault in the Daughters.
Just for reference, the Custodians find fault in literally everything, so
Not
this
this time,
might
at
have
least.
given a few people heart attacks.
They were renamed the Adeptus Sororitas, and the first thing the Ecclesiarch Thor did was assign them to the Ministorum's militant wing.
It avoided the whole men under arms thing because, well, they're women.
Thor's work continued on Terra for a decade before he left, journeying all the way across the Imperium. As for Goge Vandire, he goes down in history as an embarrassment, a cautionary tale. Hatred for this man is something every Emperor-blessed soul should feel. He was a tyrant, a brutal dictator, a liar and a
Just shit in
thief,
general.
and a genocidal madman. Thank you all for listening. I hope you learned something.
We're not done here. I haven't mentioned the reason I hate Vandire the most.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of reasons. All his killing, his brutal nature, the way
No! He's the reason the fucking towel still exists!
What?
Yeah, you know how he started all this shit and when he started it? Well, guess what was happening about the same time?
What are you talking about?
We found a stupid desert planet with a bunch of idiot Xenos beating each other over the head with rocks and actually being interesting instead of walking around looking at each other with their stupid bovine eyes and chanting, "The greater good." The greater good. Shut it! If it hadn't been for Vandire and the backlash of him being an absolute turd, the report made on the towel might have not been tossed into a file and left to rot for nearly 5,000 years. And instead of dealing with the towel, now we'd have just tossed a virus bomb at them then and wiped them out. But no, thanks Vandire, you shitbird, for making sure I have to deal with these morons saying the greater good and acting like some holier-than-thou towel sympathizers. That's why we can't have nice things, because morons like Vandire come up and no one puts a bolt round through their head.
Well,
It was such a
that
rant.
about
Jeez.
wraps this.
Not quite.
Oh.
Well, I'm happy to get my obligatory hatred of the Tau out of the way. There's yet another thing that Vandire caused. You see, there's quite a few organizations that exist in the Imperium, and there's one I'd be loath not to speak of right now. Because frankly, after Vandire, there were a lot of glances being thrown at a shadowy corner of the Imperium. At this point, the Inquisition was still very shrouded in its secret, but just like today, they were a secret that most people knew, but no one really wanted to talk about. Well, it's time to talk about them. From the founding of the Imperium all the way to the end of the Age of Apostasy, which was the name given to the time before Vandire's rule and during it, there were only two main branches of the Emperor's Inquisition. Those two branches being the Ordo Xenos, whose name makes what their focus is painfully obvious, and the Ordo Malleus, who specialize entirely in dealing with the ever-present threat of chaos. Both of these organizations are focused on threats outside of the Imperium, and neither were equipped to stop or in any way even investigate Vandire. And even if they had the ability, they lacked the authorization. Well, considering the nightmare that just happened, and the fact that everyone was sitting around wondering how Vandire hadn't been stopped cold before he even rose, when the leaders of the Inquisition cleared their throats, everyone was willing to listen. It didn't take long for the Inquisition to make its argument, and the Inquisition soon had a brand new order. If nothing else I or the Hospitaller have said can convince you of how much of an absolute horror Vandire was for the Imperium, take this into consideration. From the earliest stage of the Imperium and before that until today and forevermore, one thing about the nobility is clear. Nobility hates checks on its own power, and that's apparent to anyone that has a pulse. In fact, most times throughout history, if a noble ever put a check on his or her own power, it was because someone was about to put a check on their life. Any noble family in 40k would be absolutely thrilled to just simply wipe out entire population centers if it interfered in the slightest with their ability to be an absolute shitty person. And to be completely honest, 40k nobility is so unrelentingly self-centered it would put the worst monarchs in history to legitimate shame. What Vandire did and what he represented scared these nobles so badly that they just didn't put someone in place that could slap them on the wrist and tell them to stop. Oh no. What Vandire did and what he represented scared the nobility of 40k so completely that they gave power to an organization that would from that point forward have every right to kill them in front of their family on Sanguinala.
Holy shit,
Vandire scared them so badly that they legitimately took the Inquisition and turned it into the most terrifying secret police organization in any medium ever. They created the Ordo Hereticus. While the Ordo Xenos and Ordo Malleus look for threats from outside the Imperium, the Ordo Hereticus looks for threats on the inside. And while a pissed-off Space Marine will lead to an increase in the weight of your pants, nothing will give you more cause to be abjectly terrified than the arrival of a member of the Ordo Hereticus. Vandire was such an abject dumpster fire, the apparatus of the Inquisition was given even more broad-sweeping and authoritarian powers than it ever had before, and luckily for mankind as a whole, they're extremely good at their job. Unluckily for some innocent civilians on the way, though. Vandire's rise to power made it perfectly clear that there was a group that needed to watch over and police the inner workings of the Imperium itself. The Ordo Hereticus was tailor-made to fill this gap, and with the primary focus being the hunting and killing of rogue psychers, heretics, and mutants, and they do it with gusto. When it comes to the Ordo Hereticus, it doesn't matter how rich, powerful, or connected someone is. If a member of the Ordo Hereticus shows up, the chances that someone is going to wind up deep-fried or missing large sections of their body due to mass reactive removal shoots up into ranges that would make a Kriegsman flinch. No one is safe. Anyone can be questioned, and more importantly, innocence proves nothing. It goes without saying that this new branch was going to piss a lot of people off. To say they would just show up and slam their dick on the table and dare anyone to say anything is, well, an understatement. So in order to facilitate the new order's downright impressive ability to terrify and piss off the absolute hell out of everyone without even the faintest possibility of worrying about reprisal, they needed a heavy hand that would come in and quote-unquote burn the heretics. And if there were two organizations made for each other, it was the Adeptus Sororitas and the Ordo Hereticus. I mean, it really is a match made in heaven. The Ordo Hereticus wants to purge the heretics. The Sisters want to purge the heretics. The Ordo Hereticus is absolutely committed to ensuring that no one like Vandire rises to power again. The Sisters are beyond committed to the same thing. They both believe that fire is an excellent way of dealing with any problem, as long as the fire is holy. And they have a downright obsession with purity. Hell, you couldn't ask for two organizations to be that more perfectly aligned if you tried. It made perfect sense that the newly formed Ordo would be able to call on the Sororitas as the their military arm, when the pimp smacking of some heretics was called for. Just so the relationship is perfectly clear. The sisters serve as the military wing of the ecclesiarchy, but also serve as the chamber militant of the Order Hereticus. To summarize how that relationship works at the end of the day, it works kind of like this. If someone from the Order Hereticus walks into a chapel and tells a sister of battle to turn her flamethrower on a cardinal next to her, she's going to do it without question. So, let's now sum up things nice and tight. Vandire was such an unrelentingly horrible crapshoot of genetics that he single-handedly almost brought the Imperium to a civil war the scale of which hadn't been seen since the Horus Heresy. He killed more people than Fabledon the Harmless had even dreamed of in a fraction of the time. He caused nearly irreparable damage to the institutions of the Imperium to the point where it almost fractured completely from within. He did almost as much damage to the Imperial Palace out of pure neglect as Horus himself had done trying to take it during the Siege of Terra when he was attempting to murder the Emperor. All the while he did this, he left the Imperium wide open to attacks from all comers. To top it all off, he was such a garbage heap of a human being that after it was all said and done, literally everyone in power was so nervous about someone else like Vandire coming to power that they willingly formed an organization that would have the primary purpose of murdering them if they stepped out of line. This is why Vandire is known to many fans of 40k, because in the grim darkness of the far future, in the horror that is the Imperium, you can't just be a turd and become known for it. You'll have to literally go so far above and beyond the realms of general assholish behavior that you have to quite literally break new grounds of shit. That is Goge Vandire's legacy.
Yeah, that guy was pretty bad. That's probably the worst guy I've probably reacted to so far. And there's been a lot of psychotic, evil, and just awful people that we've reacted to on this channel, but I think this guy takes the cake. He single-handedly almost destroyed the entire Imperium and was a complete and utter douchebag, to put it as blunt as possible. So yeah, this guy can rot for all I care. I mean, he can literally rot. Yeah, this guy's a complete dick. Complete dick. So if I missed anything that was probably stated in this video, just let me know in the comments, because you guys are so much better at this than I am. You guys understand the lore trumps mine by an astronomical amount. So if I missed anything, just please let me know in the comments. But yeah, it's a great video. Did a phenomenal job like always. So I got no complaints there. But like always, please check them out in the description. Show some love. If you guys enjoy my content, if you guys enjoy my reactions, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy.